Welcome to the Best Places to Lead show. I am your host, Jerry McNamara, and I am grateful you are here or that you have decided to press play. So listen, we are on a mission to positively impact 5 million people. We were going to do it in 5 years. Year one is down. So now we're going to do it in 4 years. I like the progress that we are on. So it's super fun. And so here's what I think about as we do this. I've never met anyone who showed up to work and said, you know what, I really want to suck today. And yet there are plenty of people who are ineffective in their role, and it's not their fault. It's our fault as senior leaders. And it's why we're gathering together so that we can help each other, because two are better than one. We always want to be focused in on how we can help each other. And so I'm working with senior leaders to create compelling companies, because compelling companies always outperform. And here's the trick. We always want to make it home for dinner. And so if you have success without fulfillment, it's the greatest ripoff in life. And so we've got to focus in on our values and the priorities and the things that are super important to what it is that we're doing. And so I really believe in whole people and loving your people. So, if we're good at work, we have the potential to be great at home. And if we're good at home, we have the potential to be great at work. And so that's really the whole premise of the show. I'm grateful that Lori Goldman has showed up, Mike Grossell coming in from Brazil, because he's training down in Brazil. Zach Mitchell, my former COO, the most mentioned person on the podcast in 2022. I'm just telling you right now, I love that guy. I still look back. We grew a company to 30 million. I think if I had brought him in earlier, we would have gotten to 50 million. So when people say that I was successful, I tell them I really screwed up. And so I should have brought him in earlier. Anyway, I want you to go into the chat. Tell us where you're coming in from, and we'd love for you to say hello. We're going to continue our conversation today. I think all of you have heard me loud and clear. 2023, we have to protect our mindsets. We have to be open to change, because the wind is blowing, and we can either complain about the wind or we can adjust the sails. And that's right here in our mindset, right? And so if you guys have been around a while, you know that I have two real frameworks that I think about. And the first one is the 9 principles of personal performance. It's how you live your very best life. And then the second one is the business acceleration model. How do we accelerate businesses in predictable, repeatable environments that we feel good about, right? And so that's why we have our guest today, Dai Manuel. He has kind of both sides of this. He has built a company that he exited from, Fitness Town. He was the COO of a fitness concept in Canada, which I'm familiar with because I lived in Canada. I know how cold it is, Dai. It's the reason I live in Florida nowadays, right? You exited, you took your family to Bali, right? Lived there for a while. I love that. We have that in common. We're going to talk a little bit about travel, because we sold our house and traveled too. And this whole notion of the whole life manifesto and how we make sure that we live our life on our terms to live the very best way that we can. So Dai, thank you so much for coming and being willing to share your wisdom.
Thank you, Jerry. It's awesome to be here and see all these smiling people.
I know.
It's great. It's great. Yeah.
We love doing it as a live show, because then, you do get to see Bill Holmes, super fan, down in the corner, although he's been standing a warehouse up for his company, which why I think his hair looks a little disheveled. If you can't see it, but it looks a little disheveled, and it's probably the reason why. But Bill's been working hard. They've been doing a great job of doing that. Dai, tell us a little bit about your background so everyone can get a little bit of context on you, where you've been, and where you are today.
Wow. Let's just start with the easy one. Okay. 46 years young. I just turned 46 in the fall, and I'm a proud dad of 2 beautiful teenage girls. They're soon to be 18 and 20, actually. So they're less teenagers, more little women now. And actually, funny little side note, I just moved my 20-year-old daughter in with her boyfriend. So I'm still processing this, guys.
Dai, I have a quick funny story. I have a 10-year-old daughter. Yeah. She turns 11 next month. Now, we negotiated when she was allowed to leave the house and start dating. And I started at 50, and she is a hard negotiator, a very hard negotiator. She got me down to 37. So I don't have to worry about that for another 26 years, my friend.
So you think. My deal was never. No, I just, it used to have this little side story with my daughters and especially Chardonnay, my eldest now, who's 20. The thing was when they were younger, especially in single digits, it was like, well, if you want to date a boy, he's got to be able to beat dad in an arm wrestle. And I'll tell you, I took down these 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds. Like, yeah, I was keeping them at bay. But now I was like, I started realizing as they became teens and started going to high school, I was like, man, some of these kids are really big. This might backfire on me. So it was like, no, it's okay, but you can only date engineers now. No, it's a funny note, but he's a great guy. But anyways, I've got these 2 beautiful teenage girls. I'm a proud full-time dad and been dating my wife for 23 years. We call Vancouver, Canada home. I've been in entrepreneurship pretty much since my late teens, starting out as a personal trainer, trying to figure out how to help people with change, and things sort of grew from there. And a lot of mistakes made along the way, but they're only mistakes if you don't learn from them. So I like to think I've learned from them. May have taken me 20 years to learn from some of those, but I did learn. Falling forward. The last number of years has been beautiful. We moved back to Vancouver after traveling quite extensively for 5 years because we always told our kids we would honor their wish to finish high school in Vancouver. And sure enough, they said, yeah, you know what? We want to go back. And I'm like, really? 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 But so they did. And we call Vancouver home as well. And yeah, so I help people navigate change, personally and professionally. And listen, we all have a different relationship with that word. I know today we're going to explore what it means,
So let's dig right in there, right? So
Sure.
Why are people averse to change?
Because it's hard. Let's be honest, it's hard. Change is hard. It means us doing something different than we've probably done before, trying to create new types of results that we've identified we want. And it does require work to some extent. And it doesn't feel normal. If it felt normal, we probably would have already achieved the change that we were after. And so we have to remember, yeah, it might be hard, but every time we've achieved something that we set out to achieve, think about how good we felt once we achieved it. And I've never heard someone say, you know what? It wasn't work. Like it wasn't worth the work, right? Like it's always worth the effort. And also it's one thing to remember is when you're going through change, it's tough, right? When you're in it, like you're in the middle of a tornado, unless you're in that eye of the storm. It's pretty crazy, right? You can't see, 3 feet in front of you. But once you get through that, and you turn around and you reflect back on what you've just done and completed and achieved, it never seems as bad, as when you were in it. And I think we have to remember that. Like all of us have different experiences with change. It's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And we just have to remember that change is something that we can all navigate, and because we're all resilient, so yeah, that's sort of the thought. So it's not like we sign up for change saying, hey, yes, please, like we do in a way, but we also know what comes when we say yes to change. And very rarely does it come very easily,
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I've been thinking a lot about this, Dai. How do you help people, or how have you done this personally? How do we sustain effort in change when it's really hard? And, the reason the question behind the question, I love Jocko Willenick, extreme ownership. And he talks about discipline and, like the 0.01% of the world that are disciplined for discipline's sake, like they're the Navy SEALs. Like, all right, we got it. Let's set them aside. But the reality of it is you've got to have a reason why behind your change, or else it's easy to quit. And so like for you, what is your secret? What's the secret recipe helping people navigate change, whether it's mindset change, whether it's physical change? How do we help people sustain that effort?
I think it's a great question. And I think a lot of us have an answer to that. We can't articulate it, but we usually have a reason for wanting to start the process of change, and I'll be honest, there's been periods in my life that I've endured some pretty drastic changes, and it was hard. It was really hard. And I was actually coming from a place of fear, just to be perfectly transparent here. That motivation that we're talking about, it was fear-based. Like when I was 14 years old, I was at the doctor's office with my mom, and Dr. Quinn pulled my mom aside. He's like, Betty Ann, Dai is morbidly obese. Now, at 14 years old, I'm like, morbidly, that doesn't sound good. Obese doesn't sound good either. I don't know what either meanings of those words are, but I knew it wasn't good, based on the way that he delivered this to my mom. And, I was in a BMI of over 40. So for those that aren't familiar with that, I was very overweight. It didn't happen overnight. It's not like I went to McDonald's once and said, I'm going to have that Big Mac meal, and then I was obese. Okay. It was a process of 5 years of me living a certain lifestyle for 5 years that compounded negatively. And I think that's also what we have to keep in mind when we identify places that want to change. It's not like all of a sudden we wake up one day, it's like, whoa, I need to change this. It's usually a gradual thing that's gotten us to where we are. And, so I was afraid. To be honest, I was very, very afraid that as I was looking at 20 years old, much where my eldest daughter is now, moving out with her boyfriend, I'm like starting to envision what life's going to look like after high school. And I got really honest with myself. I'm like, I'm probably not going to be as healthy as I am right now in 5 years' time if I don't make any changes. In fact, I know I'll probably be unhealthier, more unhappy. And if I ever want to make any changes, I don't think it'll be any easier 5 years from now than it is right now. And to be perfectly blunt, I was more afraid of the idea of not changing than the idea of changing. And that's when I put action in. Now it didn't happen like that. The decision to want to see some changes happened in an instant.
Right.
But then you're left thinking, okay, well, can I do this? Can I get healthy? And I'm like, yeah, I think I can. I know there's other people that get healthy, and I might have to learn how to do this, the how, but that's just education. And so you get that answer, yeah, I can do this. And now it's like, okay, well, what do I do? And I think it's these three questions that I think can actually, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Jerry, is like question number one. So with anybody that's navigating change right now or thinking about making a change, it's like, can I do this? Can I make this change? Me at 14 years old, can I actually get healthy?
Yeah.
I needed a yes to that. I needed to get to a place that I had enough clarity and confidence to be able to say, yes, I can do this. Because then it opens up question two. If I actually do this now, whatever the how piece is, and for me, it was like, okay, if I change how I eat and I start to move my body regularly, because my daily movement looked like me changing the remote, my thumb moving, or moving both thumbs on video games. Like that was my day to day. Like literally, that was the extent of my movement. So if I started to move a little bit more, started to eat differently, will I see some changes? Yeah, I think I will. I think I can do that. Okay, well, if I do this, will it actually work? That was question two. And I'm like, okay, well, it works for other people. And that's where, you look for social proof. Today, it's awesome because you can go online and you can find testimonials, you can find success stories, you can find people that have overcome incredible hardship and have achieved huge change. And we can often see ourselves in some of those stories. And so that belief in ourselves just elevates because we get hope that we can do it too. Now, back then, again, I tell my kids I'm older than Google, I had to go to the library. My kids like, you went to the library? What? I remember on my bike and then my backpack getting books in on fitness and nutrition. Anyways, then I had to educate the how. I had to understand how to do it. So can I do this? Yeah. If I do this, will it work? Yeah. Now it's question three. And this is really to answer your question, Jerry. Question three is the hardest one to answer, but it is the most important one to answer, because it's the one that's tied to sustained change. If you're working with an organization, a team, you could say, is it worth it? Is the change worth it? But when we're talking about us like individuals, you got to look in the mirror and you got to say, am I worth this change? That's not an easy one to answer. And I'll tell you, as a 14-year-old morbidly obese teenager that had very low self-opinion and very depressed, dealing with social anxiety, I couldn't honestly look in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm worth this change. But fortunately for me, I had people around me that when I talked about the change I wanted to make, they reminded me of how good of an idea that was. They were there to support me. And they dripped into me the belief that I didn't have in myself at the time. So eventually I got to a place where I was like, yeah, I'm worth this change. I'm worth the effort. Because those three questions provide a lot of clarity and confidence. And as you get clear and confident on that, it's easier to take action and you procrastinate less. And that's critical, especially if you want to sustain change, because you have to commit to this new way of being. Does that make sense?
Amen. I think about my own lifetime, and 50% of Americans, I grew up in a broken home and, had parents that had addiction issues and defaulted on their parental responsibilities.
Hmm.
And, I'm here today because people loved me when I didn't love myself.
Yeah.
And
Huge.
it's one of those things where, I think about my wife and I when we wrote our own vows in Mexico when we got married. One of the things we said was, there is always room for one more at the table,
Hmm.
right? And it's a mindset that we don't do life alone. And, what you're talking about is our own personal worth,
Hmm.
but also two are better than one, right? I'm better because of Zach Mitchell, no doubt about it, right? And so I'm grateful for his friendship, his stewardship, his leadership towards me, and that we were better together, right? And so I think if you can assemble that team around you, you can create those positive spirals, right? And whether it's your own personal change or you're managing change inside an organization, it's the same type of concept, right? I think that's an important piece of the puzzle as you start to think your way through this. I also think about this a lot, and I talk about this. The what is easy, the how is hard. So, I've started working back out again, right? Because I know I want to have better fitness. I want my waistline to be a little bit slimmer. It's like some people are like, oh, I overcomplicated. Well, it's got to be a day. It's got to be at this time. It's got to be this diet. It's like, just start the journey, right? Because action always rewards you as you do that. And I find that the people who are the most successful ones, they take action differently because they're willing to put themselves out there to be in uncomfortable situations. One of the things that I found as I was researching you, which I loved doing, you were in a TED Talk, and you talked about vulnerability, and your wife asked you something that really struck me because it stopped me in my tracks. I do have a 10-year-old daughter. Can you share that story about how your wife teed you up and how that created some change for you as well?
Ooh, okay. All right. Here goes. Story time. Everyone pull up your chairs. No, I had alluded before that I've navigated some pretty big change, and thanks for teeing me up for this one, Jerry. My most significant and my proudest change I've ever made. Some people would think it was making that lifestyle change at 14. And that was a big deal. I mean, it took me 5 years to get in that state of unhealth, and it took me just over 2 years to get back to a place where I was healthy. But unfortunately, at that period of my life, I'd only worked on the surface. I mean, I was a teenager. My motivation, to be frank, I wanted a girlfriend. Okay. I was making these changes for reasons outside of myself rather than internal drivers. And so there was a lot of extrinsic motivating factors that got me going, but I didn't really do anything intrinsically to grow myself. And so I had gone from one challenge where it was me eating my emotions to now drinking my emotions. And I learned at 17 years old, because I was still dealing with social anxiety. And it was the funniest thing, right? I make this big lifestyle change. I become healthier and fitter, and, people paying attention to me. But yet on the inside, I was still feeling that morbidly fat teenager. And as such, my mindset was very much in this anxious place. I was also still dealing with depression. And then I remember going to a party, being invited, and getting some alcohol, having my first couple beers, and everything shifted. And all of a sudden I noticed that I could talk to people. I didn't feel as weird about myself, and I was more gregarious and outgoing and making an effort, and people were responding. So I was getting this affirmations, and confirmations like, wow, this is a great guy. We want to hang out with you more, and what I realized was this persona then became somebody I was chasing, somebody I was wanting to be, because that's what I believed everybody expected me to be. Fast forward into my 20s, I meet my wife, I have my kids, start growing a company. This habit is still perpetuating. I'm still feeling like that little kid. I didn't really do any inner work. I was always focused on the external work, keeping up the appearances and trying to live a life I believed others expected me to live, rather than actually asking myself, well, what kind of life do I want to live? And so this continued. My wife met me, and we got to know each other. We fell madly in love. We committed to having a life together. We had our kids young, and then I got into my early 30s, We'd been together for 10 years at this point. My daughters were both under the age of 6, actually 6 and 4. And my drinking had gotten to a place where it was just a regular occurrence. It was my end of day ritual, my way for de-stressing and unplugging, and I had all these reasons, that I could justify the action. And I remember this one night, I still have no recollection how I got home, but I woke up the next morning. I didn't even make it to the bed. I woke up beside the bed, face down on the carpet. It's like 11 in the morning, right? The family's already been up. Wife is downstairs. Kids are watching Dora the Explorer on the TV because I can hear it belting through the hallway. I'll save you the jingle because you'll never get it out of your head. And here I am making my way down the hallway, and Christy's unloading the dishwasher downstairs. And I mean, everybody in the cul-de-sac knew she was unloading the dishwasher. All right. Like, it was unloading it with passion. Every dish was clanging. It was making a lot of noise. And I know that she was doing that for my benefit. It was my alarm clock, like the hint, like, get up, you lazy person. And making my way down there, and I came into the kitchen, and immediately, she gives me this glare. And my wife is a tinge of ginge, okay, full redhead, and she's a fiery one, okay. That's what I love about Christy. She just tells me straight, and always has been that person for me. But the thing that I always love most about my wife, and still to this day, is the fact that when she looks at me, I know she sees something in myself that I often can't see, and she's always there to encourage and pull that out and to support that part of me. But that morning when she was looking at me, that was not how she was looking. It was glassed over. It was just like this sort of view of disgust, or like, this is it. Motioned me to the kitchen table, sat me down. I'll save you the whole long talk, but it got to a point where we came to an agreement that this is not a healthy environment to raise our kids in any longer. The way we all learn is through modeling and mentorship. You got to think about that. Anything that we've ever learned in our lives has probably been learned through those two methods to some extent and some degree. And I have to think about, what was I modeling to my kids in doing what I was doing every day? How was I mentoring those that were closest to me in my communities, in my social circles? And, she was a mirror for that. And then she asked me a question. And this is the question that Jerry was asking me to share. And this is it. Like, this is the question that changed everything. She says, Dai, are you being the type of man that you would want to marry your daughters? And I mean, instantly, it was like I got punched in the nose, kicked between the legs, and gutted, right? Like, it was just like just this instant sort of ephemeral feeling where just, and I'm someone that's worked in sales since he was 18. I'm pretty good at talking to people. I'm pretty good at handling objections, dealing with challenges. I had nothing to say because I knew she was right. And it was in that moment where I just realized, if someone like me at that moment in my life at 33 years old showed up on my doorstep wanting to come in and be close with those that are closest to me, I wouldn't allow them in. But that's what I was saying was okay with what I was doing every day. And so it was right then and there. Like, this is almost as instantaneous as the moment when I made a decision to get healthy at 14. Here I was, 33, and I made a decision. I was like, you know what? I sat my wife down. I sat my kids down. My wife's in the middle. The two kids are on the side. We turned the TV off, which drove them nuts. What? Dora? And I'm like, don't worry about it. We'll get it after, right? And sat them down. I'm like, I'm going to go 1 year without drinking. I know there's people probably listening to this and like, 1 year, that's like nothing. What's no big deal there? Okay, well, from 17 to 33, 16 years, the longest I'd ever done is like a dry January, right? Like, I've done a 30-day stint here and there, but that was the longest extent of not drinking. So for me to make a 1 year commitment, that's a 12X. That's a big deal, okay? Like, it was huge, something I'd never done before, but I was ready to commit to it. Made that commitment to them. My eldest daughter, 6 years old, with a lazy eye, these big prescription glasses on. So her eyes looked like just massive, like jumping out of her head. She's like, okay, Daddy, no coffee, no soda pop. Like, she starts listing off what she thinks are adult drinks, right? And it's like, no beer, no wine, but that moment was the most perfect moment. The innocence of children. The fact that they created something so light in something that was so dark. And my wife and I, we laughed at that moment. And it was like this instant feeling of like hope. that this can be done. And then I got to work. And I'll tell you, 3 weeks in, I realized how hard this was going to be, this kind of a change. And that's what, I needed help to do the internal work to that point. And this is when I got vulnerable with my wife for the very first time. And, we can explore that in a second, but that's the story of that moment where everything changed. Like literally, this is 14 years ago. And just to close the loop on this real quick, at the end of that year, some of you might be wondering, my wife's like, whoa, you did it. And I'm like, yeah, I did it. I'm like, we're both kind of surprised, right? We're like, holy smokes. Like, especially she was like, hey, I know when you say you're going to do something, you do it, but whoa, you did it. And it's like, do you want to celebrate? Should we share a bottle of wine and watch the sunset tonight? And believe me, there was something in me at that moment. I was like, oh, that sounds really nice. That'd be really good. But there was also something else in me where I looked at it and I said, you know what? So much has changed in the last 12 months. It's only been a year. And I can't believe how much has changed and how different I feel. I was like, what if I just kept going? Just celebrated 14 years, 14 years since I had my last drink, since she asked me that question. It's like, it's wild how much has happened in those 14 years, but it's all happened because of that one question and me leaning into an answer that felt right. I knew it was right. I knew it wasn't gonna be easy, but I knew it was right for me, So anyways, thanks for asking that question, Jerry, by the way.
It's a beautiful story. And thank you for being vulnerable enough to share it. I grew up in a alcoholic home, went through rehab 5 different times and, had to leave home because, I loved my mom more than she loved herself to be able to stop drinking. And she did get sober and, got a liver transplant. And I spent 16 extra years with her. I call it Willy Wonka's golden ticket to life, and had a great relationship with my mom before she passed away. But we did miss 15 years together, nearly 16 years together. And so, as I think about high achievers, right, we do take in so much stress. I look at lawyers and CEOs, and I have a number of CEOs who are doing dry January right now. Like you mentioned, dry January. It is a thing, right? We have to pump the brakes and say like, oh, let's make this external factor of January. Okay, it's going to be dry January. Like, tell me about the inner work that needs to be done, because in all my work of having to, go through Al-Anon and all of the things that I had to go through to get my mental state right, what was the inner work that you were doing? Because typically it manifests, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, whatever it is, whatever that toxic thing is, usually manifests out of some type of insecurity that we are having, or at least telling ourselves, right? I tell my CEOs all the time, if your thoughts, your feelings, or your actions aren't serving you, change them, because you're the only one that can. But for you, what was that inner change that needed to happen, and how did you navigate that? Because I think there's a lot of people, whether it's, for you, it was alcohol, but for other people, it might be the stories they're telling themselves, the imposter syndrome or the saboteurs of, you can't do that. What was that thing, and how did you navigate it?
Great questions. Well, I guess if I go back to that moment, I alluded that, I had this sort of idea of who I believed everybody expected me to be. And eventually that identity became the identity I was always trying to put forward. But I also recognized it never really felt natural. Like it always felt like I was putting on a mask.
Yep.
And why do we put masks on? To hide who we really are. Either because we're embarrassed, we don't think people will like who we are. I mean, there's lots of reasons we can try to justify us doing that. And, my reasons, well, as a kid, when I went through a really emotional time when my parents separated and divorced, not having an outlet to talk about it, there wasn't any resources. This is back in the, early 80s. In the early 80s, believe me, there wasn't a lot of resources for divorce, because it wasn't like it is today. Over half of marriages end in divorce now. Where back then, I mean, there was one other kid in my class of 30 kids that didn't have his original parents together, so there's a lot of stigma.
Right.
And because of that, I didn't have support. I didn't have an outlet to speak. And so I did go internal. I learned to sort of cope with my emotional state by literally using other things to influence it or to mask it. And then for me, it was food and video games. Like it was like I was chasing dopamine on the one side and also looking for those sugar rushes, those confirmed sort of emotional states that can be created by food that we eat. And unfortunately, unhealthy food a lot of the time can create a very immediate response in us. We get that instant high. And for me in that moment, it was an escape. So fast forward, eventually I thought I overcame this, but really all I did was I was able to shift the external world and my physical traits, but internally, mentally, I was still that kid that was dealing with a lot of that trauma and didn't have an outlet for it. Now, I can speak to this now because 14 years ago, when my wife asked me that question and I made that commitment to go 1 year, and I was 3 weeks into it, I'm like, holy crap, what did I just commit to? I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. And I remember us sitting on the couch, and this is the first time, and my wife and I at that point have been together for 10 years. And I'd never truly been vulnerable with her in those first 10 years, like truly vulnerable, to let her in behind that mask. All those insecurities I had, all these other hidden beliefs that I had about myself. Imposter syndrome. Oh yeah. I mean, look it up in the dictionary. I think my face is there, like that's what I felt at that time. And I just let her in on all that. Like it was like a verbal dump on my wife, on the couch, like, bleh, and I just let it all out. And it was incredibly cathartic. Felt good just letting it out. But to be fair to my wife, she's on the other end receiving all this. And man, she was so generous with her listening and for hearing me. And even with a little bit of empathy. And when I say a little bit, like she did empathize, she gave me what I felt I needed, at least at that moment. But then she said, I think you should speak to somebody about this stuff. And at this point, I had a huge stigma against, therapy, through psychology. Like, honestly, I was very atypical around that because some of the mentors I had in my life would often poo-poo that idea or speak negatively about it. So again, I believe that it's something I shouldn't admit to or not do because it's seen as maybe making me weaker than I am, or I'll be perceived differently. Again, it was all about this image that I thought I was projecting. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to do something. I found a psychologist. I also found a therapist. My wife and I found a relationships counselor. And a little funny side note, okay, full disclosure here, we're second meeting in with that lady. My wife and I are sitting on the couch across from her, and she leans over and she goes to Christy, Christy, I think it'd be better if Dad just came back on his own. So it was all good. I knew I needed some help and I needed some work, and I just needed to work through all these things. And so here's the thing. I am someone that is a little bit type A. When I make a commitment to do something, I like to do it, and I want to do it well because I don't like to waste time. And I went all in on the inner work for 6 months, like all in. I just did everything. I was open. I just shared with these individuals. They'd ask me a question. I tried to be as honest as I possibly could with every response I gave them. And it was hard. Oh my gosh, was it hard? Okay, like it was, because I'm learning new skills, and vulnerability is a skill. And learning how to open up to somebody, if you've never done it before, it doesn't feel like natural. It doesn't, because we've never done it before. Otherwise, we'd be doing it. And so I had to learn that skill at the same time. But a miracle happened. And when I say miracle, it's an accessible miracle that anybody can tap into. But all of a sudden, I started to feel better because I started to also reframe some of the trauma I went through as a kid. I could start to see where the patterns were emerging. And more importantly, I could start to see and how I could forgive what I needed to forgive to move past some of those things, but also to embrace where I am now, or at least 14 years ago, and where I wanted to go to. Letting go of some of the facades was the most freeing part. This idea of now starting to live the life that I want to live, not the life that I thought everybody else expected of me, which, by the way, is one of the top 5 regrets of the dying.
That's right.
One of the top 5 regrets is, when people are on their deathbed and ask, is there anything you regret? One of the top 5 answers that every single death person that's facing that end says, like, I wish I lived the life I wanted to live, and so at least I feel very grateful that I was, in my early 30s when I came to that realization, and it was like very early on to start leaning into that. So yeah, that was sort of it, and I know there's some stigma still with this, but man, the conversation around mental health and mental health advocacy online, what we just saw happen with DJ Twitch, and all the conversations that have emerged from that situation, these are good things, because we are talking about it more. We're more open to the conversation. So I see things trending the right direction, right? But it's tough still.
I think it's super important. And when I think about leaders, living your life on your terms instead of blowing like a leaf in the wind, which is, those are my terms, not yours, but that's what you're talking about. Like I was blowing whatever way people thought I was supposed to go. That's what I did to try and get that acceptance and gain that. And, I laugh because, they say the truth will set you free unless you're the recipient of all that truth. And then you're like, whoa, the boulder has just landed on me. Holy crap. What do I do with all of these thoughts that Dai has just shared with me? And I think when you're able to get to that place of vulnerability and trust, that's at the heart of great relationships. It's where you can build trust. It's where it comes from, right? And so, I think about, my life. I've been through therapy, and there's times in my life where I've been like, man, why am I acting this way? And, like you stop and you think and you go through the process. And I call it like, there's times that I have to go back and give little Jerry Jr. a hug.
Yeah.
And you recognize this thing happened to you. It is real. It's not serving you because it's not setting you up for being the person that you want to be. And so now we have to change it, but we have to first acknowledge it. And, I lovingly I give Jerry Jr. a hug in those places where I'm like, man, that I'm showing up in a place that I'm not proud of. And that has happened to me a lot in my life, right? Because we are all fallible human beings. And so it's just getting ourselves back to center, but bringing that conscious intention to what it is that you're doing. Let's talk a little bit about, I think it might be kind of fun, right? Mindset. And you talked about modeling and behavior. Last week, Timmy Gallagher was on and he was talking about the same thing. It is amazing to me when I get this chance to talk to high achievers all the time, people who have been really thoughtful and conscious in their intentions. And there's always common themes. Morning routines are there. Meditation is there. Conscious intention, living a considered life. These are not secrets, but knowing is one thing and doing is another, right? And so, you've been in performance and fitness performance. Talk to me about creating the mindset change, because I think getting yourself back to positive is super important. And, again, 2023, we're through COVID, quote unquote, although I just had a friend who was in the hospital with COVID complications, or I should say, at least in Florida, Dai. I know you're in Canada, but in Florida, COVID basically didn't happen here. And so, we're coming through COVID. Now we have some economic uncertainty of exactly what's going to happen, what's going on. How have you been able to maintain positive mindsets? Do you have any tactics, tools, tricks that you've used to just maintain that center of performance?
Well, I guess, thank you. I know there's lots of different ways that we can sort of unpack and tackle this question. And I think we have to remember humans aren't emotional. We are emotional humans. Okay. Like it is just part of our DNA. We're emotional beings. We have two parts of that brain, and, part of it's emotion based and some of it's logic based, but that emotional part has a tendency to override everything, and it often influences a lot of our decisions and our actions, our choices, our perspective. And so if we recognize that we are feeling people, feeling is the big thing I want to note here is if we can influence how we feel, it's going to also affect how we think. And one of the simplest ways to start to positively influence how we physically feel is by being active with our body, moving our body with specific purpose, that intentionality to create a positive response. And I'm not saying go to the gym and pump iron, okay? If you look at like the blue zones, right? Like these 5 populations around the world where they have the highest density of people living to be 100 years or older, okay? Now, these are people just waiting around, okay? They're not just sitting there like, oh gosh. Like, I don't know if you saw it, but the oldest person in the world passed away yesterday at 118 years old in France. 118! Like, there's some clues out there, people. Like some clues where there's people living and thriving well into their hundreds. And when you look at the studies of the blue zones, they looked at these 5 population densities and they said, sheesh, there's 9 commonalities that all 5 of these areas share. These centurions, they all share these 9 common things. One of which was just they move every day. They move their bodies. Some of them garden. Some of them dance. Some of them walk to the store and back. Like they are just physically moving every day. There's also elements like they're deeply connected with others. They have a strong sense of community, strong sense of family. They also have a very specific and strong sense of purpose, a reason to get up every morning. They also have a very specific way they eat, and so you look at all these factors, there's like some very serious clues here. We can learn from this. We can emulate some of this, implement some of this, if you will. And that movement piece is so critical because it's so accessible. Put on your shoes, walk out your door, okay, and walk for 30 minutes. Maybe walk at a more brisk pace to elicit more of a positive response because it gets the heart rate elevated, get a little bit of sweat going. But either way, you push the body a little bit. You won't, at the end of that 30 minutes, go, I regret doing that. I've never had anybody ever say to me, I've never had a client say, that workout you encouraged me to do today, well, I really regret I did that, guy. It's just like I give them like this beautiful, I've got this salad that I love to make, right? This West Coast salad. And I always say, put on some cedar plank salmon or some chicken or some lean steak, like whatever. Put it on, but make something that you're proud to look at. That's like Instagram worthy, something you would love to share publicly and say, look, I'm about to eat this, But I've never had anyone eat it and message me later and say, you know what? That salad I had for lunch, man, I regret eating that today.
Terrible.
I feel awful about that, but so there's certain things that we know when we do it, we never regret. We never rue the feeling of doing it. And so it's looking for more opportunities to do the things that naturally make us feel good.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Because
start there.
I mean, listen, I have weights next to my work, and I pick them up between calls because I'm trying to get like microcell. I'm gonna have pipes just like microcell. And you're right? So you can do some bicep curls or some tricep kickbacks. There's zero reason, right? I don't know. These things cost $20. Zero reason not to have some level of exercise and effort in your day every day.
You're spot on. But here's the thing too. If we want to get into the science of it all, for those that want to know what's going on in your body, like you encourage these positive endorphins to start to just move through your body. You start to feel better. You start to look at things a little bit differently. You start to interact with the things around you differently. You start to manage stress differently. You're going to find, wow, I'm feeling really good right now. I know normally today I might go and have like here in Canada, we've got our double and a donut, right? We have these Tim Hortons chains, and I think they've started to pop up in the States too. So I apologize for sending that south, but that Canadians are known for their double and and a donut, which is like 2 creams, 2 sugars, and a coffee, along with some sugar, sugary treat. And it's like the staple, right? Especially if you're a hockey parent, like it's like it's what you have when you're taking the kids to hockey, right? But I jest with this, but yeah, instantly you get that instant gratification, but pretty quickly afterwards we have this nasty crash. And what do you want to do? Well, you don't want to be in a crash. What do you want to do? You want to get up again. So you tend to reach for these things that give us that instant lift. But the problem is it's this constant up and down, and we want to level that out. So when you start to feel and look differently, you're going to start to choose different foods just naturally. This is intuitively, you will, because you're going to be feeling so good. You're like, I know what happens when I normally eat these types of foods. I know 30 minutes from now, I'm going to feel like I need to have a nap or eat more of that stuff. I don't want to go there. I want to make better decisions. And it all starts. One good decision does lead into another good decision, into another good decision. And that's all you do.
Positive spirals. And, I shared with you that for me, my keystone habit is working out. So when I'm working out, right, I know that I have more energy, better clarity of thought. I sleep better. And, I make better food choices because, if Mother Nature got something wrong, I think it's about caloric intake, because it takes me 60 minutes to burn 600 calories. And it takes me 60 seconds to eat a cookie to put it back in my body. And that to me is like the greatest unfair thing in the world. But I digress. Mother Nature got a lot of other things right. One of the last things before I wrap us up here, you are such a positive person. It is very clear that you feel good. You're showing up in the way that you want to. And I'm a big believer in mental fitness, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we do enough to cultivate the mental fitness, being like super conscious and intentional. Like I'm a big believer in morning routines and meditating and journaling and setting those things out. Mike Rossell, who's in from Brazil, professional volleyball player and owner of a company, he's been working on his mental fitness probably for the last 6 months. And, he texted me and said, he's like, I'm getting 4 to 5 times more done than I've ever gotten done in my life. And there's not a scale here, but I feel lighter on my feet. It's incredible, right? And it's like these unlocks that we know that the potential is there to get deep into reservoirs that we didn't know that were possible. And so, for you, how do you tap into that beyond exercise? Any other things that you're doing to tap into that area?
Yeah, I love, it sounds like Michael's like just in that constant state of flow, right? Like just like where it just feels like even the obstacles, you sort of you float over them, right? Like it's just what might have been a challenge to slow you down. It's like, hey, it levels up the speed bumps in a way, when you're feeling good. And for me, I know there's certain self-care rituals, and I do like to use the term ritual. I'm very ritualistic. It's more than just a habit. Like this is lifestyle. For me, it's getting at least a solid 6 hours. Now, my quality of sleep, I do track that. I make sure I get at least 5 REM cycles a night. I know that if I do that and I get some deep sleep and I monitor my sleep, so I know what's actually happening, I wake up feeling great. And that gets me started on a good foot, because inevitably I'm going to have a nice big smoothie in the morning, filled with lots of great antioxidants, lots of whole fruit, lots of spinach. If you want to see what my typical smoothie looks like, I shared a reel today on my Instagram. I did it, a real quick one, just showing what I put in my smoothie. It's not very complicated. There's like 7 ingredients, right? But I start my day with that. So I infuse my body with a lot of nutrition. Makes me feel good. I do that before I have my coffee. Okay. Like I'm doing that. Don't worry. I like my coffee too, but that's just a nice way to sort of set my day up. It starts my day off really well. Then I want to get my heart rate elevated for a portion of time, usually at least 30 minutes to an hour. I like to read a little bit of fiction. I set a goal for myself by 50. I want to read the top 100 books of fiction, and so I'm working through a bunch of this literature right now, but I'm reading, 10, 15 pages every morning. And because I love that creativity that comes with fiction. The storytelling aspect. I went down deep on the professional development side, and I ended up picking up lots of personal development and professional development books, and had over a decade of just devouring a lot of that. And I was like, I want to get back to stories, like some great stories. Those are some of those instant rituals that I know if I'm maintaining those, my day is always set up well. And the cool thing is there's always an opportunity for a hard reset. And what I like to invite people to do, if you're ever feeling like things are running astray or not moving as well as you like, create a self-care day. And literally it's a date with yourself. You block it off on the calendar. It's a non-negotiable. It's a day just for you to take yourself on a date and treat yourself well. What I love to do on those days, I get a haircut. I get a massage. I take myself out for a nice healthy lunch. We have some great little vegan restaurants here in Vancouver. I'm not a vegan, but I know if I go eat just an all vegetarian based meal, I often feel really good afterwards. So I get a nice vegan meal. I'll also go and here in Vancouver, this time of year, we don't get a lot of sun. So I'll go do 10 minutes in the tanning bed. All right. I'll go for a nice long walk along the seawall, taking in some greenery, some parks. But those 5 little things I'll do in an afternoon, and I'll tell you, it's like an instant reset. And for those that remember the old PCs, remember Control Alt Delete?
Yes.
Jerry knows what I'm talking about. There's a few
blue screen.
That's right. Control Alt Delete, Control Delete. That is my Control Alt Delete.
Got it.
I do that, and then I have quality time with my family in the evening. like a good quality family date. Maybe we go to a movie and for dinner, we go for, go bowling, whatever. But it gives me this nice day where I just focus on myself, and it's just this hard reset, gets me into a better place. So come the next day, I've got this flow already created to keep making good decisions.
I love the whole idea of like a hard reset. One of the things that I say is I will not let my bad decisions of yesterday negatively impact my ability to make positive decisions today.
Sure.
Sometimes we get into these spirals where we're going on the way down and we don't stop the spirals. It's like, just takes two positive decisions, one to stop the negative spiral, one to start one. And that's why I love the hard reboot. One of the things that I'm thinking about, Dai, and when I wrote the 9 principles of personal performance, I was like, yeah, of course, diet needs to be in there. It's somewhere in there. And exercise, of course, needs to be in there. And sleep, of course. As I was writing, it was like principle 4 or principle 5. And then, I was with my mom in the hospital. And I said, if you don't have your physical health, then you can't have any of the rest of it. Right. And so it became principle 1 that the foundation of life is health, and health is your diet, exercise, and sleep. And, I find it unique that you honed right in there on an alignment there, because I do, right? I mean, if we don't, I told stories before of being 26 and on a hospital gurney running a high growth company because I thought I was having a heart attack because I wasn't taking care of myself. Right. And, diet, exercise, sleep. Sometimes as senior leaders and high achievers, we give everything into the business.
Yeah.
And, on the airplane, they always tell you, put your mask on first. And I think you've been a breath of fresh air reminding us of exactly that. Fun stuff.
Hey,
so, Dai, if people want to find more out about you and what you're doing and follow your smoothies, because Maria put it in the chat, I'm going to check it out. My daughter loves smoothies, so that'll probably be our smoothie tomorrow morning.
Nice. Oh, well, enjoy. It's a yummy one. And you'll notice that there is an ingredient in there, and I use cauliflower rice. And people are like, cauliflower rice? It's awesome because it doesn't have any flavor. It takes on whatever flavor you have, but it's a prebiotic. It's really good for a healthy gut, but it also helps stabilize blood sugar throughout the day. So just a little tip, throw that in. It also makes your smoothies extra thick. Okay. In case you're wondering when you see that. I've had people message me already like, dude, you're putting cauliflower. Well, that's weird. I'm like, try it. Right. So listen, I'm online. Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, I'm most active on. My kids are still trying to get me on TikTok. I haven't quite figured it out yet. But if you go to those other ones and you message me, it's me you get. Okay. So I manage all that stuff myself. I always say, reach out. Let's have a conversation. We can talk about change. We can talk about what color the sky is. I mean, I'm all good. I just love connecting with people. And that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. And you never know where a conversation will take us. But Jerry, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today.
Absolutely.
This has been so much fun. Love the format. Love all these smiling people here as well. Thank you all for being here. This is super cool. What a excellent show, but also wonderful audience. I mean, hello, this is great.
It is fun. I love doing the show live because it does add a different dynamic to it. So we appreciate the heck out of you. I'm so grateful for everyone joining and you sharing your knowledge. And the thing that I'm getting better at, Dai, is I'm on this mission to positively impact 5 million people. And one of the things that I forget to do is to tell people that I'm on this mission and then to invite them along on the mission with me. And Bill Holmes has always been a great reminder. He's like, dude, you can't do this one alone. And I'm like, shit, you're right, Bill. And so as a helper, I need to remind myself to invite people on the mission. So if you're finding this as micro content, hit the like button, comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're listening online on a podcast, whatever your favorite platform is, I'd love for you to comment, leave a review, 5-star, all of those things, because it helps us grow the mission that we're on. And I'm so grateful that you're here with us. And I would tell you, invite someone next week. Invite them to come along on the mission, and it'll be super fun. Although next week, I just remembered, I'm not going to be here. I'm flying to Denver. Lori, I'm going to be in Denver just for half a second, though. My wife's national sales meeting is out there. So we're going to go snowboarding in Breckenridge, take some family time. So next week, we're going to take a week off. And then we will be back the following week, the first week in February. I believe we have former NFL football player Marquez Ogden. He's going to share how he went from the NFL to a janitor. He literally lost everything and was super humbled, and how he had to build resilience to get himself back up and moving in the right direction. And so it's a super inspiring story. He's a very humble dude. The other interesting dynamic for him, his brother is Jonathan Ogden, who's largely regarded as one of the best NFL players of all time. And so he had a little bit of living in the shadows of his brother. And so we're going to talk about all of that. He's open and honest. And so I hope you guys can come join us in 2 weeks when I'm back from Denver, enjoying the snow, and I'll be back in Florida where it's nice and warm. So thanks again for coming, Dai. Awesome stuff. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.